Welcome, everyone, to the Let's Get Vulnerable podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Sarah Yudkin from You Love and You Learn. You may have found her page on Instagram. She is such a wealth of relationship knowledge, and I'm so excited to have you, Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
So, Sarah is a relationship anxiety coach. She's passionate about helping people feel content and happy in their relationships. She went from feeling anxious, doubtful, and uncertain in her own relationship to feeling a deep sense of commitment, fulfillment, and optimism. Since then, she's helped over 1,000 people from 35 countries through online coaching, courses, and webinars. The You Love and You Learn online community consists of over 300,000 people, and they're on a journey to show up more intentionally in their relationships. I love this, Sarah. We have, I'm sure, so much in common, and it's always fun for me to have other relationship experts on the show because I know we can do some deep dives. So I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, you were just saying that you got engaged recently, so congratulations for that. And I mean, it's such a interesting journey when you can relate to that story of having gone through so much of your own inner stuff with relationships to then being able to take that leap. And I say leap because it is still a leap of faith. Like we don't have those guarantees, right? But I know that we can relate on that part. And I just think I wish more other people were talking about this. And that's why the name of your podcast of Getting Vulnerable, I feel like speaks perfectly to these types of conversations.
Absolutely. And that's really where I want to start with our interview is asking you about how did you connect to this mission of helping people the way that you do? So tell us a little bit about your own personal journey and then what led you to doing the work that you do now.
Yeah. So, about, I would say almost 10 years ago now, my parents got a divorce and I wasn't overly shocked by it. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this came out of completely left field, but it still kind of, stung a bit. And I was old enough to kind of understand where they were coming from with it, but don't think I ever fully processed the feelings that it brought up. Like, I think I just kind of kept it moving, like, okay, it makes sense, no big deal. But as I got into my relationship with my now fiance, it was kind of in the back of my head subconsciously, how do I make sure I don't end up the same way my parents did? Like, kind of scanning the horizon, making sure that he ticked all the boxes, or if something came up that wasn't good, it would cause me a lot of anxiety. And I would be worried, like, would this lead to a future divorce or something being wrong with the relationship? So I think stuffing down all those feelings of loss or, feeling pain, like our family unit had got broken up and like things were different. And I never really embraced those feelings at the time. So they kind of bubbled up to the surface as I was getting more serious. And for the beginning stages of our relationship, I thought it was just kind of like, oh, like I'm afraid of divorce. Like, it makes sense, no big deal. But it eventually became so debilitating that one day I had a breakdown kind of at the start of the pandemic. I had just gotten put on furlough from my 9 to 5 job. I was living with my fiance for the first time. At the time, we were still just dating. The world was in shambles, and all of this stuff was happening that fell out of my control. And so I was hyper focused on the relationship. And we were on a walk one day, and I just was sobbing to him, like, I don't know if I love you the same way anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I feel like something's off. And I just kind of like let it all out, like the volcano erupted. And in that moment, he responded to me in like such a empathetic way and was like, that makes sense. Like, it makes sense why you would feel scared. And we had just been reading a book about dopamine. And he was like, yeah, dopamine always wants the next best thing. Like, it makes sense why you would feel upset that we're not as exciting anymore. We're out of the honeymoon stage. Like, everything he said was just so kind and supportive. And I was like, what the heck am I doing? Like, this is someone that I love so much. I care about him. He's an amazing partner for me. I want this to work. Why am I almost like, it was almost an out of body experience being so anxious and trying to sabotage something that I realized, okay, maybe this is something I can actually explore and work on. So that was really what started it. It wasn't the only epiphany I ever had, but that was kind of like a light bulb moment that led me to want to learn more about this.
Such a powerful story, and there's a lot there that we can get into. Tell us a little bit more about just your story in terms of how did you progress and then to getting engaged, and maybe we can talk about that process too.
Yeah. So from that point, when I just had that breakdown, I decided I wanted to learn how to be better at relationships. So at that
Mm,
time, I still kind of was not the most compassionate with myself. I was like, well, I must be bad at relationships because I have this amazing relationship with this amazing person, but I'm the one getting in my way. So I was still kind of beating myself up for it. But I decided to start a blog. It was during the pandemic, almost 4 years ago now. And I know we have similar timelines of kind of starting this stuff. So for me, I was just like, I want to learn as much as I can about relationships. And I just started exploring things. I learned a lot from the Gottman Institute. I learned a lot from Brene Brown about vulnerability. I learned from someone named Cheryl Paul, who I really love, who wrote the book, The Wisdom of Anxiety. And she talks a lot about the root of anxiety. It's not just necessarily like you're feeling anxious. It's what is the message? Like, are you really scared of uncertainty or are you scared of something going wrong? And that's why it's causing you to latch on to these things. So I started just diving into things so much and it all started making sense. Like, wow, I'm not the only one that thinks this way. I'm not the only one that has attachment stuff coming up in their relationships. It just all felt so much more clear. And when I started sharing my story, eventually people really clicked with it. And wow, I've never heard someone talk about this so openly. I'm sure you've gotten that a lot too. Like, wow, thank you so much for normalizing this and sharing it. And as I started navigating my own journey, I started being able to coach other people and I took coaching certification. So it really became this kind of cycle of I'm learning something for myself, but then I'm teaching it to others and making sure I really understand it. And that just fueled, I would say, kind of like a upward spiral of healing, if you will. And I don't remember exactly at what point, but I just remember being like, I'm not actually so scared anymore about what wouldn't work because I know that I can handle it. Like that, I think was the biggest thing that came from this is realizing I can't control the future. Like no one that gets married actually can predict if they're going to stay together. I used to be so anxious about that. Like someone else is certain that their relationship will work. But really, you're just making a leap of faith. You're doing the best that you can with what you have. And I realized I didn't need to keep digging. Like I already knew everything I needed to know about this relationship. And so we started talking about, do we want to get married? At one point, we didn't even know if we wanted to get married because both of our parents actually are divorced. But my fiance isn't as worried about that as I am. I would say I definitely took that on more.
mhm.
But we were just kind of like, let's just keep going in our relationship. And eventually, if we decide that we want to get married, like we will. And so over the last, few years, we really were just kind of playing it cool. And last year, after being together almost 7 years, we finally were like, let's get engaged and, let's do this as more of a celebration of our love versus as something that we have to do because other people expect it of us. And I think that was a big shift as well. A lot of my clients come to me and they're like, I'm turning 30 in a few years. Like I need to be married with kids by then. And I think there's a lot of external pressure on all of this. And so being able to release some of that and go at our own pace, like that was huge. So I feel like there's again so much more we can talk about, but I'll end there and see what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I love this so much, especially the piece about doing it as a celebration of your love, not because of timeline pressure or expectations of others. One thing I've noticed in building a really healthy relationship is that pressure to get engaged and the pressure to get married really just went completely away. And I think being able to be in that securely attached, relaxed, stable connection, then you just have this natural progression of, hey, we want to do this not because we feel like we should or we have to, but because we want to. And that's where I found myself too with my partner. Um, you mentioned so many things in sharing your story. One of them I want to talk about. I was just talking with a client about this yesterday. Um, this idea of the grass is greener. Am I
Mhm.
settling? Oh, am I settling? Is this person not actually good enough for me? Should I be looking for someone else?
Mhm.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Oof. Well, it's such a common thing and doesn't get any easier now with how much we see on social media, obviously. But what I have come to believe about that is there's kind of like a spectrum to settling on one end and then like perfectionism on the other end. So, like, if you're in a relationship where like someone's not matching your effort or like, someone's not showing up for you or like there's deal breakers or like there's certain things where you're like, this is just like not a healthy dynamic or something's off. Like, of course, I'm not recommending people settle in that type of relationship, but I think on the other end of the spectrum, there's this perfectionist belief that's like, oh, if my partner doesn't dress like the exact way I think they should, then like I'll just go find a partner with a better style. But then in that next relationship, you're like, oh, but their voice sometimes bothers me. So I'm going to find a partner like that has this. And so there's levels to it. And I think finding somewhere, not necessarily in the direct middle of the spectrum, but like everyone has their own level of comfort with what it means to settle into a relationship. It doesn't mean you're settling, but like by choosing someone, eventually you want to settle into the dynamic with each other. Like you mentioned, that safer, more like steady state. And that requires, like, if you imagine a dog kind of like doing circles and then eventually like plopping down somewhere, like eventually they have to settle down in order to relax in the afternoon sun. Like the same comes with a relationship. If you don't want to be in that constant energy of, is this working? Is this not going to work? Eventually you become more comfortable and familiar with somebody. So that requires letting go of this perfect partner checklist of these 27 things have to be met, but everyone is going to have a different level of what feels comfortable for them to like settle into the relationship. So that's kind of how I think about it. You can always have the grass is greener mentality no matter who you're with. So you have to check in if that's coming from your own perfectionist beliefs or if there's actually an incompatibility.
It's so true. I think a key component with this is building self trust and learning how to trust yourself and really connect to yourself internally. And I'm sure you would agree with me that I think perfectionism can actually come from this place of fear and desiring control, right?
Yeah.
So we might feel like we're settling or we're not getting all the things that we want in a relationship, and that could be bringing up so much for us. But if we went below the surface of that, there's probably desire to control or predict, or if I don't get the person who has everything on my list, does that mean this isn't going to work out? So just what you said about knowing, is it coming from fear or perfectionism, or is it actual an incompatibility and something that you're not comfortable living with? That if you imagine yourself 5 years from now and that thing has not changed, that you would be uncomfortable with that, then by all means, I think you do have to look at, is the relationship right for you? But I think so many of us have these really, really high standards or things that we want, and they're actually more rooted in fear and desire to control.
For sure. And I can give an example, like something that I was talking about recently with at least one private client, but I can think of many others in the past that have this situation. And I've had it too, where Nate, my fiance, is more of an introvert and I'm more of the extrovert. But I would say, I mean, I don't know what other people's relationships are like. I can only speak for mine, but I would say he's more than willing to come to things like a good amount of the time. But there's also times where now we live close to my family and I'll go get lunch or dinner with my mom or I'll get dinner with my dad. And I'm not necessarily saying you have to come with me every time. Or there's times where I'll go out with a group of friends and he's not interested, even if they're his friends too. Like there's certain times where he's opting out. And sometimes there could be this signal where it's like, oh my gosh, am I settling if my partner doesn't always want to spend time with me? Or shouldn't they always want to do something if I'm going like that? But at the end of the day, I have decided for me that I don't necessarily need that quality. And I think if someone was really checking in with themselves and they were asking, why does it bother me so much? It's usually because of other people's perception. Like, oh, your partner should be wanting to spend time with you. And so the fact that they're home, like, are they antisocial, or like, do they not like us? Do they not want to hang out with us? But I've had the opportunity through this work to like check in with those beliefs of like, well, why do I care so much? And a lot of times it's driven by my own insecurity versus an actual need. Now, if Nate was like, hey, I can only join you once a quarter to hang out with friends or family, I'd be like, whoa, like that's not going to work. I need a little bit more than that. So I think this is an opportunity again where you can check in. If there's a genuine need, what is that need and how can I clarify that? And then maybe my partner is willing to meet it if I'm more direct, but you have to start with understanding yourself.
I love that you said this because I always think about Esther Perel talks about this a lot of you can't have all of your needs met by your partner. And I
Mm-hmm.
think so many of us have this idea of, oh, they're going to be my best friend and my therapist and my health coach and my travel buddy. And they're going to want to go shopping with me. Or we do all these crazy expectations on our partner. But the reality is they're not going to be everything to you. And I think what's key is deciding what is important from your partner. What are the key needs that you want to have met by your partner? Just like you mentioned of sharing those things and saying, are you willing to meet me here? Can we compromise on this, right? And then there's things that, hey, you're going to go to lunch with your mom or myself, for example, this happens a lot with travel. I love to travel and my partner is like, I'm okay with it. And we end up compromising. I do a lot of travel with friends or travel for work. And then occasionally we travel together. And that's something where when I was really honest with myself, I didn't need a travel buddy in my partner. So I think there's so much compatibility that's about, well, what are your core needs and what are the things that you want to have met by a partner? And then what are the things you can meet yourself or you can have it met with another person?
Yeah, that's a great example because I feel like in popular relationship advice, like if you told that to someone, they might be like, oh, really? Like he doesn't travel with you. And there could be a sense of judgment because we have this expectation that like your partner should just be doing all these things with you. And I think what you said is so important. It's almost like, how can we narrow down that core set of needs versus maybe what is like, okay, sometimes, yes, like I would like to travel together, but that doesn't necessarily have to be every time I go because I just think sometimes we throw away a beautiful person or a relationship because we're looking for the 100% versus like the 80 to 85 to 90%.
Absolutely. And I think what we do too when we are having such crazy high standards for other people, what I realize is we're also doing that to ourselves. We have so much pressure and judgment towards ourselves of trying to be a perfect partner. So I think when we accept our partner where they're at for who they are, simultaneously we're doing that for ourselves. So everyone wins when we could just say, we are not perfect. We are not going to have a perfect relationship, right? We're just going to communicate and create a healthy, secure connection.
Exactly. And one thing you said, if I can add, just like you inspired me to add to this, which was sometimes our partner is mirroring back to us something that we're not taking full ownership for with our own needs. So, like, a classic example, but it comes up a lot with my clients is like, oh, my partner seems to have all this downtime to relax. But like, then, I don't necessarily understand. They don't want to spend this time with me, but it's because they're prioritizing their downtime. And so then I check in with them, but are you actually needing them to come with you to this experience? Or are you just frustrated that they actually have a clear sense of yes or no? Like they say no to something if they don't actually want to go to it. Whereas a lot of times my clients might say yes to whatever their partner is asking them to do. And so their partner is mirroring back to them in that moment much more self trust and much more confidence of being able to say an authentic yes or no to something. And I just feel like that happens a lot. And so if something's really bothering you or if you notice resentment popping up towards your partner, also looking for the quality in them that you might be able to learn from or grow within yourself. Because
Mhm.
I think there's something so powerful about that. But a lot of times the projection we're making, we worry, oh, well, I can't handle that thing. It's something bad or wrong. And actually, it's just uncomfortable, like mirroring something to us that we haven't wanted to acknowledge.
I think that is such a common one. I know I have definitely felt that in my own relationship, especially with career transitions and having periods where I was working a ton and my partner's like looking for jobs or trying to figure out what they're
Mm.
going to do. And I would catch myself of, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so angry about this. And why are they not doing more? And having to realize, okay, Morgan, actually, you need to take some downtime for yourself. You need to rest more. So I think that's such a good point that our partners are a mirror. When we can get curious about, oh, why am I frustrated with them, or why is that anger coming up? There's usually some really important data below the anger, and it's usually something to do with ourselves. So
Yeah.
there's relationships are such a great personal growth tool, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. And I know a lot of people who say, like, when I'm single, I am totally fine. And then I get into a relationship and I have all this stuff come up. But that's because, I'm not necessarily overly a spiritual person, but I've opened up to that idea. And I feel like spiritually, as like a means to grow and evolve, like relationships are one of the best things you can do. So, like, if you're looking to grow, like putting yourself in that position versus just kind of being your own best self, like, there's nuances to that. There's both and, like, yes, you can do your own work before getting into a relationship, but some of it you can't do because you're not going to get triggered as much by like the grocery store assistant as you are your own partner. So it's both and, but I just think a lot of times we think, the reason that we're triggered is because we're in the wrong relationship, but actually it could be that it's just the biggest opportunity for us to learn and grow.
So true. So true. Yeah, I will talk with people about when you're in a relationship, you have that opportunity for corrective emotional experiences. So
Mm,
actually experiencing new things helps rewire your brain. But if we don't give ourselves that opportunity to date or have new experiences, it's really hard to grow in the ways that we need to. And just what you said, of course there are times where people have to step back and not date. That's a good thing for us to dive into, actually. I think because I get that question all the time. I don't know about you, but people are like, how do I know when I'm ready to date?
mm,
Um, I think a lot of people pressure themselves into it, and then there are a lot of people who stay on the sidelines when they really should be dating. So it can
mm.
go both ways.
Yeah. I will say, just transparently, it's been a long time since I've been like considering dating or not, because Nate and I have been together over 7 years. So, like, I haven't been in this frame of reference for a while. But I imagine if I was in there, like, if something happened and I was in that position now, like, what I would be checking in with myself on would just be, am I willing to accept kind of like the consequences, both positive or negative, that can come from this? Because a lot of people are like, I only want to date if it works out, or like, I only want to, like, try if I have a good connection with this person, versus the experimental approach, which is like, I might meet someone that I like, I might not, or like, let me give this person a chance to get to know them. I think being more willing, like, this might work, or it could fail, or it could teach me something. But if you're kind of only having a set criteria of like, I have to meet my person next, or like if you're having rigid expectations of yourself, then that could be a sign to just pause a little bit and try to widen the expectation before dating. But again, it's been a long time since I've been in that frame of reference. So I'm curious if you have anything to add.
I love that point, and I honestly think becoming securely attached gets you into that mindset of, okay, I am good if it works out, I'm good if it doesn't, and just having that, excuse me, having that no expectation mentality. I talk a lot with people about, okay, we don't want to have any expectations about where something's going to go, if it's going to work out, but we do want to have clarity on our standards and be aware of what it is that we want. So when you have that approach, I think you can go in and you have the clarity on what you want. And then you also have no expectations that this person is going to match what you want. So you have that love scientist mentality I talk about, where you're just willing to gather the data. And if someone's not meeting what your standards are, you didn't expect them to, right? So then you can just say, okay, this is not the relationship for me. And it's all data, it's all learning. I always tell people there's no failure in dating. So I think, yeah, just having that same thing you said, that mindset of no expectations. Can this be fun? Can this be just a growth opportunity? And then for me, I also think about capacity of emotional capacity, emotional availability,
Mm,
because you do have to make space in your life for dating. So when I'm working with clients and they're going through their childhood trauma and they're rewiring their brains, they don't always have a ton of capacity for dating because they're doing a ton of emotional labor. So
mm,
it's really about moving through that, and then okay, once you have some emotional availability and capacity to hold space for another person, and you could get excited about that, then that's more of a sign that you're ready.
yeah, I love that. I'll also add too, from my experience, and not everyone will probably agree or resonate, but I think that because I was, younger when I met Nate, I was 24 and now I'm almost 32. Like, I've done a lot of growth and understanding my patterns and rewiring through the process of our 8 years. So I would just say, like, if someone's listening and they're like, oh, well, I already am in a relationship that really matters to me, but I still feel like I'm not fully emotionally capable, or like I still have some growth to do, just knowing that you don't necessarily have to, again, like pause that and like leave and fix yourself first. But I totally love what you're saying, though. Like, the more you can do that, the better you'll be able to show up. But sometimes that can happen within the dynamic too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what's beautiful is when you can build a secure connection with someone like with you and Nate, then you can express, hey, I'm working on myself, or hey, these are the
Yes,
patterns I'm noticing. And then you have that beautiful support system as well. But you have to kind of let someone know what's going on so that you can get some of that space or some of the support, whatever it is that you need. So I think
definitely.
if you are single and you're not dating right now and you know that you need to do work on yourself, then by all means, it's so helpful to do some of it before you start dating. But if you are in a relationship, that's also a beautiful opportunity to go, wow, I can work on myself. And just by me working on me, that's going to change my relationship.
Yep.
And also, I can ask my partner for what I need and I can ask for support. So I love that you shared that. It's really key too.
Definitely. And one thing I found that's helpful in this conversation, if you are in a relationship or if you're starting a new relationship and you're sharing with your partner that you have things to work on, is trying as best as possible to like zoom out to the big picture. So, like, if I share with Nate, like, it kind of scares me that I might make the wrong choice, that's very different than saying, like, I don't know if we're good together. Like, it's the same thing, because like it is both about me making the right choice or not, but one of them feels more like this is something I'm working on, or I'm noticing this pattern within myself. I have these core fears coming up, or I notice these needs and I'm trying to figure them out, versus like, I don't know about you meeting these, or I don't know if we can work. And I know in the middle of an anxiety spiral, it can be hard to separate the two, but the more you can take this from that, I guess, love scientist lens, but also towards yourself of like, how can I understand the data from my past experiences? Like, how have the things that happen in my family or past relationships or the beliefs that I hold about the world, how are those data points coming together to affect my relationship operating system? And then you can communicate that from a more place of ownership versus you're doing these things that are triggering me.
So good. I love that you mentioned this. And I think there's 2 points I want to bring up that relate to that, which is in the long-term relationships, it's really helpful to start sharing your past relational experiences. I see this pattern sometimes where people will almost trauma dump those in the very beginning of dating. And that's really not the right approach, because somebody hasn't earned your vulnerability. They don't really even, you don't know if it's a safe place for you to share those experiences. However, over a long-term relationship, intentionally disclosing those things as context can be so helpful for your partner. So
Hmm.
talking about, your parents' divorce, or for me, talking about the relationship I was in with a narcissist, and intentionally disclosing to give my partner context and understanding to some of the things that trigger me or the way I show up can be so, so helpful. And then I was going to say my favorite phrase, which I'm sure you've heard this, but being able, when I'm talking with my partner about something that's coming up for me, being able to use that phrase from Brene Brown, where she says, "The story I'm telling myself is," right? Because then
Hmm.
we're saying this isn't necessarily reality, but this is the story that I'm telling myself.
Yes, I love that phrase. And it's not to invalidate, and I'm sure you agree with this too. It's like we're not trying to invalidate our feelings, but we're just acknowledging that like this is our interpretation and it's not necessarily objectively right or wrong. And that's where I think conflict can start, is when we're saying this is what happened versus this is how I interpreted what happened. And I just am such a big fan, not overly taking responsibility. It's never 100% your fault. It's always like it takes multiple people. Obviously, I'm not talking about like manipulation or like abuse. That's not
Yeah.
really what I'm saying. But if you're just in like a regular tiff or disagreement with your partner, usually both people have a role. Like someone could be defensive, but like you're also probably bringing some sort of complaint into the situation, because defensiveness just doesn't like pop up out of nowhere, right? So like just trying to understand your role without blaming yourself, like taking ownership of, oh, I think I maybe could have said that in a different way. I can own that piece. And here's what I needed from you in that moment. It's so much better than like, you did this, you did that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things I really work with with clients, is using I statements, taking ownership, because we have to remember, I think a lot of us, especially if we're in an emotionally dysregulated place, we just want to get everything out. But if you can pause and ask yourself, how can I express myself so that I can be heard? Right?
Hmm.
Those are very different things. And you can still get everything out, but do it in the notes app on your phone, do a voice note recording, go journal. There's other ways to just process and get everything out. But when we're communicating with our partners, we want it to be intentional, securely attached, assertive communication. And we have
Totally.
to learn how to do that.
Yeah. And there have been times where I have written a note and like delivered it to Nate, like on a handwritten note, or like sent him an email about something. And I could have like said it to him in person, but there just are times where I really was like, I need to take this space and I want him to know exactly how I'm feeling, but I feel intimidated to like sit down and have this like whole conversation about it. And then later we regroup and talk about it. But sometimes, like, I know it can be intimidating to have to like share what you're feeling in a way that is more secure or regulated. And so I love that permission for people to like take that space first and try to process it internally. I'm an external processor, so I know it's not always easy to do that, but whatever methods you can try, like it's going to help your relationship so that you don't feel like you're reacting, you're responding intentionally.
Exactly. And that's a good point of just keep trying and you'll find a system that works for you. I love the whole notes app on my phone, just getting everything out, and then I will filter from there, and then I will go and have an intentional conversation. But I do really well with just a brain dump and get everything out first. And that rarely happens for me now, but I still have that available. I have that tool. So it's all about finding what works for you. Be willing to experiment. Um, Sarah, I want to ask you, because you are so great at this, so kind of shifting directions a little bit. What would be a tip for someone if they are experiencing relationship anxiety? They've never dealt with it before, and they're just, maybe they're in a relationship right now and they're kind of spiraling and they're feeling like oh my gosh, is this the right relationship? Am I even a good partner? They're just finding themselves spiraling a lot. Where would you have them start?
Great question. I mean, there's so many potential avenues to answer this. So I'll just say from the start, this isn't like the only thing that you could try, but I have found it is so helpful for me to practice regulating the emotions that are coming up without attaching a label onto them. And so, one of the tools I love for that is somatic processing, where you just notice, like, I notice that I'm feeling tightness in my chest. I notice that my stomach is churning. And you can even go as far as to label it out loud, write a note in your phone of like, I am noticing anxiety feelings. I am noticing it in my chest, because you want to turn the prefrontal cortex back online versus just trying to like figure it all out, because that's happening reactively. Your prefrontal cortex is more conscious and intentional. And so if you take time to notice and speak or write or say in your head, this is what I'm noticing, this is what's coming up. And my third step that I just recommend is like breathing in to that sensation, almost instead of trying to like make it all go away, the tightness in your chest. Like, can you take slow, intentional breaths, almost as if you're like breathing into the sensation and allowing it to be there? That is the first thing I would recommend people practice, because I've had so many clients where they're like, I can't sit still when I'm feeling anxious. I can't meditate. I can't do this. I can't do that because I'm just so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
And then all the spiraling that comes from that is just unhelpful because you're in the fear mode. And
Mhm.
maybe you've heard this like 3-step process from Tony Robbins before, state, story, strategy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but like when you're in an anxious state, your story that you tell yourself is going to be anxious. And then the strategy you use is going to be anxious. So, like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Maybe this means my relationship isn't good enough. And then I'm probably going to use a strategy of like pulling away from my partner or starting a fight or, having some sort of reaction. Whereas if you take the time to get into a more grounded state, then the story you have might be a little bit more open minded. Like, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I don't need to figure it out right this second. Like, it's okay not to know. And then maybe even your strategy could be a little bit more gentle. Like, I'm just going to go sit next to my partner again, even though I'm feeling a little bit triggered. Like, maybe they can give me a hug, or maybe we can spend some time just hanging out together. So, to me, it starts with your state internally, and I've always said to my clients, trying to think your way out of it is just going to stir up more dust or more
Mhm.
confusion. So, trying to start with that, but also, I alluded to this just now, but like trying to give yourself permission not to have the answer right away, I think is so important for anyone with relationship anxiety. Because, like we said earlier, if you're like, I'm on a clock, like I need to figure this out, I need to know, I'm losing time, like I all of those pressures that we place on ourselves, and they're not always like intentional, it's societal, family, things like that, but the more pressure and stress we add to the situation, the harder it's going to be to tap into that self-trust and actually explore, is this an incompatibility, or is this my own stuff that's blocking and sabotaging the relationship? So I think in addition to like learning how to regulate, it's also about learning how to turn off the pressure points that are telling you like I have to know this answer right now. So those are kind of 2 tips, but open to any responses or anything you want to add to that.
I love it. I think those are such a wonderful place to start, and really just even building that habit of tuning inwards, because I think a lot of times with relationship anxiety, we can be so tuned into our partner or to our external environments that we're not even taking time to connect to our inner experience. So I love that, of being aware and then sitting with it and allowing it to be there, and giving it a label and seeing where it is in your body. I mean, all really, really, really good points. I have another question for you it's funny, I get this one a lot. I was talking with a client about this the other day, and it's kind of a two-part question, but I think there's so much comparison out there, especially with social media, or even what we see of our friends' relationships, right? Like the parts that we see. And then we can start going, well, oh my gosh, what about my relationship, right? And I just wonder how you help clients with comparison And then the other part there is us thinking how a relationship is supposed to feel, and that it's supposed to always feel like butterflies and so much passion and like a storybook romance, right? I think so. There's this idea of like how it's supposed to feel. And then I think also comparing ourselves to other people's relationships, and just curious your thoughts on how to cope with those things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, both. I feel like we could have a whole podcast episode on. There's like so much to go down that path. But I think with comparison, especially like normalizing that is important because there's a lot of advice. It's like, don't compare. And I get the intention behind it, or like comparison is the thief of joy. And I agree. Like, absolutely try to not do it as often. But we've grown up like societally, or like our species has evolved to compare and like, am I fitting in? Like, am I going to get kicked out of the tribe? And so comparing to other people has always been part of our DNA. Like, it just used to be on such a smaller scale. So you used to compare to your next door neighbor or like your coworkers, but you weren't necessarily seeing a million other people's relationships put on social media. So I think normalizing it and like not beating yourself up for comparing is really important. But what I try to share with my clients is using the comparison as a cue to check in with yourself about your own needs or your own kind of vision. And an example of this that I give is like, let's say you're comparing to a couple that's like always making out or like has a lot of PDA, right? And Nate and I lived in Europe for a few years. And like, if you go to certain places like Spain or you go to Italy, like there could be just people that are like very passionate and that's like how they've grown up and that's how they operate. And I used to be like, oh my gosh, like, is that the right way to be in a relationship? Like, am I just not in love enough? Like you said, like, I'm not feeling enough of those buzzy feelings where I have to just be like constantly making out with my partner 24/7. But I realized, like, in that moment, I can check in, is this actually authentic to what I feel or like how I want to operate? Or is this something that's been imposed on me? And so you can kind of use it as a cue. Do I want this in my relationship? And if the answer is no, then you get to practice releasing that belief or changing it or expanding it to something different. But if the answer is yes, then how can you take small intentional steps towards trying to nurture some of that more? And it doesn't have to be like suddenly you're just kissing your partner every time you leave the house, but like holding hands more, rubbing their shoulder more, just like trying to find ways to infuse that in your own way. Because again, comparison is going to happen, but how can you use it to kind of grow or nurture your relationship? That feels more like helpful and tangible than just like feeling shitty about yourself.
I love that so much, of using it as a way to be curious of, oh, there's a reason why maybe this comparison's coming up. Is it actually something that I'm putting on myself and it doesn't feel authentic to me? Or is it something that, hey, I would like more of that in my relationship? So I love that framework, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that with us. We've had
Yeah.
such a good conversation. I feel like this time has just flown by.
Yes, it's been so great. And I mean, like I said, we could talk for hours about this stuff because both of us, I'm sure, have so much to speak to about it. But I feel good about where we went.
I love it. And I can't wait to come on your show as well, where we could continue this conversation. I want to
Yes.
tell the audience how they can connect with you. So tell us all the things. What are the best ways to connect with you?
Yeah, so on most of the channels that you would find me on, like Instagram, TikTok, my podcast, I'm You Love and You Learn. So check those out. My podcast dives very specifically into a lot of the key themes about relationship anxiety. So definitely excited to have you on and talk more about that. But yeah, that's like the main places. I would say Instagram is kind of where I post most of my updates. And if you want, I have a free guide called the Relationship Anxiety Roadmap. And so if someone comes to my page, you just have to comment or DM roadmap on any of my posts and I will send that over to you and it will help get you started of like how to navigate some of the basics of relationship anxiety.
I love it. Awesome. And we'll link everything in the show notes as well. So, Sarah, I ask all my guests this question. I'm going to ask you, if you were walking down the street, random person comes up to you, they want to know your best life advice of the moment. So it doesn't have to be like of all time, but if someone stopped you today, what would you say to that person?
Hmm. What's coming up for me is love is a practice. So I have that framed in my office. And I feel like that was the advice that I really needed a while ago, because I thought that you either had to be good at relationships. Like I said, I started my blog. It was like, I need to get good at this. I thought you were either just good or bad. And it was kind of a fixed mindset of just like,
Yeah.
some people are just good at relationships, others are not. But I really have been loving the word practice a lot lately. And then, I always remind my clients, just this is practice. Like, you don't have to be perfect at it. Just keep showing up and keep evolving. And it makes me feel really good to know that love can also be a practice, and that some days you might feel more loving, other days you might not, but that you can always return to it. So that's what I would say to them.
That's beautiful. I love it. That's so awesome. Sarah, you've been such an incredible guest. Thank you so much for your time on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Talk to you more soon.
Sounds good. And to everyone listening, of course, we are wishing you high self worth and great relationships. I'll talk to you soon.